Sup Shredders, my name is Logan, aka Spiderhands, and welcome to SP Reviews, where today we're going to be checking out a track from an act named Kevin Jeong titled Painful, which is featuring Joey Law. And if we switch over to here, we're going to be listening through this track from start till finish. I'm going to hear what we think. Let's go. Let's do this. Oh, damn. I like the sound of the percussion there. It's kind of sweet and it's kind of yeah, I think it's the sweetness of those synths and plucks as well. Interesting chord progression as well. Ah, okay, and tone of those kicks. Ah, we've got that gentle sort of build there. It's nice to just have the instrumental motif begin without the vocals. I think that shows strength from the producer there, confidence in their own accompaniment.
In darkness, maybe you could rescue me.
Oh, this is Joey Law singing, is it? They have a great voice. Are they harmonizing the seventh?
Your absence, finally I've changed myself to fit you.
Because this is the first time I've heard Kevin Jeong or Joey Law before, but it's kind of, this is why I like doing these reviews. You never know what you're going to hear next. Great panning on those piano lines as well. Shimmers around the headphones. I love the sense of anguish as well we get from the vocals. We're really selling that performance there. And on top of the kind of pretty sort of emphatic sounding accompaniment with, like, you know, the, you have a very somber bass line in there. Oh, a little bit of oscillation and portamento in there, you know, and those claps are sounding nice and fresh, and the side chaining of the kicks as well when they come in. Oh, sick. Sick drop. It's very professional, actually. I'm liking the sound of this, you know. You know, like, it sounds like a lot of music I've heard from this genre. I'm not entirely sure what kind of house it is, though, so if someone can help me out in the comment section, that would be great. You know, like, it just, I think that this is a case where that drop is really nicely tied into that vocal section, and some of that tension is carried across in the harmony here, even if it's mostly bass or sort of like stab focused. Oh, I'm liking the melodic lift at the end there. Again, there's absolutely no filler in here. We have those little additional sort of piano parts, little flutters around the sides. You know, we're not just sitting with that original concept with the arrangement of the key parts, or like the drums or anything like that. We're allowing, again, those pianos to sort of sparkle in the sky and create this atmosphere and environment for everything else to flourish in. Reasonably technical, actually. I'm sort of tempted to say it's a little bit too busy, but at the same time I don't think it's necessarily too busy, because there's all these sub-layers, you know. It's not like we're getting some of those piano melodies or any of the keys or other sort of like synth parts they're not interfering directly with the vocals in the standard of the stereo field or anything like that, even if they take turns between this sort of like verse and bridge part. Again, phenomenal production. What I mean is, like, there's almost like three levels here. We've got the vocals as the main ones. We've got those pianos on the sides, and we've got these even more sort of sub layers of like the gentle little claps coming with the and how those are panned and how they flicker in between the left and right sides of the stereo field, and how they know exactly where to notch these different instruments as well. It's testament to their experience. I like the slow build here. And the filtering of those basses there is gorgeous. A relatively simple motif, but it's all the extra little bits of development involved. Wasn't that cool? And that was really clever as well there, how we had those vocals just sort of hover over top of the break. And those vocals have been more of a constant in the second drop than the first one. I like the fact that we're aware we couldn't necessarily copy and paste that first drop. Just add a little bit extra at the end.
So painful, so painful. You realize why this is so painful.
You know, it's a sensational first impression. It does sound like a track that's ready for release. I'm just going to have a quick listen through some of the verses and the chorus sections, and then we'll do the conclusion. Because this is the conclusion of my review of this track by Kevin Jeong and, featuring Joey Law. I presume, by the way, that I think Kevin might have been singing either the verse or the bridge, and then Joey was doing the other part. I'm not quite sure who's which, but they both sang well, you know. What is this track about? I think this track is about someone who is realizing that the situation they're in with someone, they weren't who that other person needed them to be. And the pain was real, you know. It's very painful when you realize that you aren't up to someone else's standards or expectations, or you can't provide what they need from you. And it can be difficult to come to terms with that, to understand that sometimes it's literally just that you were never meant to be there because they had, for instance, unrealistic expectations or something like that. But then also, if you're acutely aware of what you could have done to do more, that is all the more reason why it could be painful. So I think that's what the track is about. And I think that the vocal performances from both Joey and Kevin sold that incredibly well. There's a sense of desperation and angst. I mean, the verse was a lot more coolly delivered. I think there was a bit more calmness and sort of, it was almost like it was retrospective, you know. Whereas the bridge was more of a kind of a started kind of frustrated angst there. It's like, damn it, this is really painful. This is really tough for me. I'm not enjoying this. This sucks, man. The pain doesn't go away. The wound won't heal, etc. And I like the way that not only the lyrics were told and sold to the listener, but also the performances from both musicians were great. I think they occupied slightly different frequency spectrums. I think that the first vocalist, whether that were Joey or Kevin, was a little bit lower than the other one. It's kind of worked well with a lack of a bass resonance. There was a little bit more going on in the bridge or the build section, so it made more sense to have sort of harmonized vocals there. We had like a mid and a high range, and they sort of worked really well on top, even though they were surrounded by the other sort of synths and piano parts and everything like that. I think that both vocalists showed great understanding of vocal technique, were comfortable in their head and chest voices, although I don't think that necessarily the first singer got too high up there. You know, they were very comfortable within their range. They showed their individual personalities and textures and timbres really, really well, and stood out separately in the mix and were distinct. Made the most of everything that was around them to tell the story the best way they could. I don't think I would have changed anything in here vocally. I did like the fact there were harmonies in the builds especially, and I like the fact that the painful hook line was repeated over the drop, especially the second drop, where it was just basically sort of hitting hard, you know, because that drop was phenomenal, but having the vocals was the icing on the cake over top, really sort of like take it home, you know, especially when we had that sort of halfway point of the second drop where things sort of like cooled down a little bit before going back into the quarter note kicks and the heavy sort of bass lines and everything like that. It's dope. The motif behind it was really colorful and intriguing, you know, like we had a 4-chord sort of progression and bass line there that I think carried through with the entirety of the track. You know, we didn't really sort of separate ourselves from that, but it wasn't necessarily power and how it was, even though there was some extensions in that there, not only from like the chords themselves, but also from the melodies and other sort of lead instruments that were stacked on top alongside the vocals. It was more so a case where it was like the bring back and the coming in of the drums. You know, when you've got a track that's 3 minutes 40, you know, that's not necessarily a long song from like, if we look at the entirety of music, but like 3 minutes 40 is also when a lot of singles are like 2 to 3 minutes nowadays. You've got to have some way to sort of carry the heft of that motif and make it engaging for the 3 to 4 minutes. And I think that Kevin Jeong and everyone else involved in here did really well here. I think having that structure of the musical motif, sort of instrumental intro, then coming into the verse later on with the kicks, you know, it's a fundamental part of the genre, but also it just worked really well here. It was something that was consistent, enjoyable, and something you could almost rely on. But at the same time, it wasn't that predictable, because again, we had the development of those piano lines in that second half there. And while we had a similar sort of bass line and sort of chord progression throughout, they were voiced differently in different parts of the frequency spectrum by different instruments, and it were never disinteresting. I think the intensity of the percussion, how it sort of wavered and came back and really sort of stuck it to you, especially in that first part of the intro, I was almost of the mind that maybe those kicks were a little bit too loud. There was like some sort of like ping-pongish kind of delay or something like that going on with those kicks, and I wasn't necessarily a fan of that immediately, which is why at the start of the review, start of listening section, I was basically trying to gather my thoughts together. I was like, do these ingredients necessarily match each other? And I personally feel that in the end, when I got the further context to the rest of the track, I started to see where we were coming from with it. Ultimately, I think again that the structure of the verse build drop, the ABC thing works well, and there was no need for a departure from it here. But again, I'm glad there was that development of the piano parts in the second half, and I'm glad that I didn't change up too much else because it was catchy as hell anyways. You know, the drop especially hit like a train, and I'm liking that there was a slow build there. We didn't rush to that sweet spot too quickly. You know, we took our time. We made the most of the length of the track. You know, we didn't end up needing to make a 3-minute 40 track with like the heavy part being most of the focus. We were confident again with our motif for it to sit well, whatever we did. And yeah, honestly, again, I mean, I mentioned asking if it was a little bit too busy earlier on, but I think it towed that line. It tiptoed across it. I think if we'd had more intensity with some of those additional lead layers, especially in the second half, would have been too much. But I guess that's testament to production, recording, mixing, and mastering, which in this track I was very, very happy with. Again, I bear in mind the fact that I was undecided initially about the levels of like the kick and everything like that to start, but I can appreciate the fact that there were compressors on there, you know, keeping everything in line and nice and flat. Again, and then also it's a genre where like the kicks are gonna hit, they're gonna hit you in the teeth, you know, they're gonna kick you in the throat, because that's what you need from this type of genre. It needs to slap, you know. You don't want some soft kicks that go doof, doof, you know, that kind of stuff. You need that power. In that regard, I can understand that there's a little bit extra sort of layering of the effects chain in those kicks just to make them stand out and sidechain well. But it's also worth noting that the actual vocal recordings were great. I think they might have been using 2 different microphones for the different vocal takes. They sounded slightly different sort of audio quality wise, but not to a lesser extent. They were both recorded well. I can just tell there might have been different microphones. And I might be wrong there. I know a lot of musicians nowadays are working remotely and collaborating together online digitally. But I think that both Kevin and Joey sounded great within the song. And I don't think they should have done anything different from the production perspective. There was nice attention to detail paid from like the effects chains on the various vocal tracks that were nicely filtered and EQ'd and placed in the stereo field. But I'm also glad they didn't stray too far from that and try and widen it too much because of all the strings and sort of synth parts and the bass and the drums and the piano. And there was just too much stuff from an arrangement perspective to really do any sort of like wild crazy stuff with the vocals in the stereo field. I'm glad that we didn't sort of like screw with them too much. We had a level of restraint on that there where we understood that if you have something that's great, you don't need to fix it. It ain't broken. It was nice and loud without pumping, so the limiting compression was handled really well. And there weren't any weird resonances in the frequency spectrum, so they were niched and leveled well. And all in all, I'm in two minds about how I personally did this review. I'm reasonably happy with what I've said about it, but I need more time to think about how I feel about this track in general. It's one of those songs where I think if I had more time to hear through the lyrics and more time to listen to how everything connected, I'd be able to appreciate it more. It's kind of a slow burner. Some tracks I review are ones where you sort of learn to love them over time. While I can appreciate the musicality and the attention to detail and the approach with the vocals and everything like that, I think there's more that I can get from it from repeat listens. So take that, I suppose, as a recommendation to listen to this repeatedly, because this is effectively my review of this track by Kevin Jeong, featuring Joey Law, titled Painful. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please do go show Kevin Jeong and everyone else some love via their various social medias and their YouTube page, and stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time as they need the help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world, and I'll catch you in the next review. Spiderhands Out.